shall we begin?
The games begin.
All right.
A new age has begun. An age of freedom.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
Get to the chopper!
This is going to be quite a ride.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to the Movie Pit Podcast. I am your host, Christian Renteria, and this is the Movie Pit Podcast, where we talk about all the big breaking news items of the week, along with the trailers that came out this week, and we will talk about the movies that are out in theaters and streaming this weekend for all your viewing pleasures. However, this week's going to be very different. If you follow the Twitter page for the podcast, I mentioned because of just the way work is right now, especially this week, this podcast is going to be very down and dirty. And by down and dirty, I mean literally 2 movie news items, because that's really the only 2 real big ones that have come out. No trailer talk this week, and straight into the movies that are coming out and streaming this weekend in theaters and again, in theaters and streaming that came out this weekend. That are coming out this weekend, rather. It's just it was a weird week. It's just the way it's working out, and obviously, if you've been following the podcast, you know that I've been, especially this last handful of podcasts. A lot of them have been recorded. You can probably tell by the audio. There's a little bit of echo in there. I've been recording these at work, either in a classroom that I just happen to have all day, or in my car, or, very rarely on occasion back at home, very late at night, super quiet so I don't wake anybody up. So yeah, this usually by the end of the year, it gets a little crazy. But I made a promise last week that I was going to do a podcast every week for this month to end the year off strong for the podcast, and I will keep my promise on that. I could have easily just said no podcast this week, but no, I'm not going to do that. So no trailer talk, no trailer spotlight this week. However, there are trailers that came out. All of them are linked down below. There was a new trailer for Megan that came out, which if you saw Violent Night, I think that was the exclusive for that movie, because it finally came out. It's basically the same trailer. I just want to mention a cool French adaptation of the Three Musketeers. It's going to be a 2-parter that's coming out. That's coming out next year. We'll talk more about that. And of course, a bunch of other trailers that are down below, so you guys can go check them out. So let's just get right into the movie news. Like I mentioned, there's only 2 movie news items we're going to talk about. At least at the time of this recording, those are really the only 2 real big movie news items that have come out. And the first one is the sequel to Ghostbusters Afterlife. That's found a new director in Gil Kenan. He directed Monster House, which is kind of his most probably famous movie that he's directed. He's also directed City of Ember and A Boy Named Christmas. Not only that, in addition to McKenna Grace, who was of course the lead in Afterlife, she was already confirmed to return, but now reports are saying that Finn Wolfhard, Carrie Coon, and Paul Rudd are all expected to return as well. It would be weird if only McKenna Grace came back and not, her brother and her mother and essentially her new mother's boyfriend. But it's nice to actually see that in the report instead of being like, they may or may not come back. Who knows? But they are expected to come back. It's also confirmed that the movie will take place in New York City, but any actual story details are unknown at the moment. Kenan was actually an executive producer on Afterlife and will step in, of course, into the producer role, along with Jason Reitman, who also, of course, directed the first movie, obviously taking over from his father, Ivan Reitman. But Kenan going from executive producer to co-writer, because he co-wrote the movie. Apologies. Kenan co-wrote the movie with Jason Reitman, who was, of course, sticking around as writer and producer. Kenan, like I mentioned, was, as I was planning on saying, moving up from executive producer to director on the sequel. The sequel does have a release date for next year in December, and they are planning to start filming right away in January. So it's going to be a quick turnaround on that. But if obviously if they didn't think they couldn't do it, they obviously wouldn't. So expect to hear a lot more about Ghostbusters Afterlife in the coming months, as production is expected to wrap up, and more casting announcements along the way. I haven't seen Monster House. It's one of those movies that everyone's like, oh, you gotta watch it. So I don't really know Keegan's deal, and never saw City of Ember. I think people have forgotten about that. I'm pretty sure that's the one with a very young Saoirse Ronan. It's based off a young adult novel. It came out like around that young adult novel craze. I think it was before the young adult novel craze, so that's probably why it doesn't get a lot of attention. But yeah, I remember seeing that movie trailer and knowing that a young Saoirse Ronan is in that movie, but I never actually watched it. I never actually heard of A Boy Named Christmas. So, but they obviously have enough trust in Keenan to take over directing duties, and obviously Reitman's going to be there as producer and co-writer on the movie. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, moving on to what have been, regardless of how the news week turned out, the biggest movie news item of the week, the DC films stuff that's going on, and it's still kind of we're still feeling the shockwaves of it. DC Films is going through its, of course, transitional period since James Gunn and Peter Safran took over. But one thing for sure, because I'm going to get to that in a minute, but one thing for sure is apparent: Wonder Woman 3 is no longer on the docket. The Hollywood Reporter reported that the third outing of Wonder Woman is no longer on the table, even though Patty Jenkins recently turned in her treatment of the script that she co-wrote with Jeff Johns. They also note that Gunn, Safran, and Warner Brothers co-heads Michael DeLuca and Pamela Abdy met and talked with Jenkins, telling her the news, and that Wonder Woman, as it stood, it did not fit into their new and still unfolding plan. And then here is, I mentioned this also on the Twitter page, so if you follow me, you probably saw that. There were multiple reports. There was the Hollywood Reporter report, and then there was a Deadline report. Both were very similar in what they were trying to get across, but both of them also had things that were very different in terms of what the future looked like. But it looked like there may have been some clear up later on, because it happened at night. So, obviously if things pop up, I will try to put them in here, and if I can't, then obviously I will put them up on the Twitter page. But at the time when it came out, one report made it sound like they being Warner Brothers and DC Films, were undecided on a Black Adam sequel. While another report, I forget which one it was, said that the sequel was not happening, but a Hawkman spinoff was in the works. And this is the first time we're hearing anything of a Hawkman spinoff. Of course, Hawkman was the character played by Aldris Hodge in Black Adam. So that was very interesting. Reports also said that despite the video and post that Henry Cavill released saying that he was back as Superman, a Man of Steel sequel is still up in the air. They don't know what they want to do with Superman. They don't know if they want to bring Henry Cavill back. There's also some reports, or I don't know if it was a rumor or report, saying that Henry Cavill had filmed a cameo for the Flash movie that they are apparently not using because they don't know what's going to happen with Superman and Henry Cavill in the future of the DC movies. Jason Momoa is most likely done with Aquaman after Aquaman in the Lost City comes out next year, and could move on to another character that he and James Gunn have apparently talked about, and rumors are suggesting that it is the character of Lobo, a character that Jason Momoa has shared enthusiasm to play Lobo. So there could be that. And on top of all that, Gunn and Safran are going to have their meeting with David Zaslav, of course, the overall head of Warner Brothers Discovery, which will be about their outline for their plans for the DC universe, which essentially, with all this news coming out and people are speculating, and there's some sources within that kind of know what's going on, could be a reset of some sort, because obviously, Warner Brothers Pictures, Warner Brothers Discovery, DC Films are trying to obviously kind of separate themselves from the old regime, which is Walter Hamada's regime of DC Films, even though he, came in and did what he could to save the DC movies, and of course the Snyderverse characters of all that. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how all this plans out. Obviously, James Gunn has been very vocal on Twitter, answering some questions and hinting at the future of the DC universe, of what he will be doing and what he plans to do. But all of that is still not concrete or anything like that, because they obviously have to have their meeting and it has to be approved. So this is crazy. So let's break it down a little bit as much as we could. Obviously, the Black Adam sequel may or may not happen. And then there's confusing reports that Black Adam is losing money. And then there's another report, or in that report, I think it was Deadline maybe that said that report, that Black Adam, in fact, didn't really lose a lot of money. It's still going to be, it's not going to go in the red. It's going to go in the black. So it's going to be a positive for Warner Brothers. The reports of them losing a ton of money are apparently inaccurate. So we don't know what's going on with that. But obviously, Dwayne Johnson was very, very heavy in the marketing for Black Adam. He's been attached to this character for over a decade. And the movie finally came out, and fans seemed to love it. Critics were very mixed, if not a fan of it. And the fans were okay with it. It made a decent chunk at the box office, but it looks like it may not happen. And obviously, we can make fun of the hierarchy of power has changed in the DC universe, and yeah, it has, because David Zaslav has come in and be like, nope, or James Gunn has come in and be like, no, we're not going to do a Black Adam sequel. So we don't know what's going on. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on at the time right now with that. James Gunn and Peter Safran are going to talk about their plans and see what happens and goes from there. Obviously, the big one that I think everyone is upset about is Henry Cavill, because we've been wanting Henry Cavill back as Superman. He's wanted to play Superman. He's finally coming back as Superman. There's obviously those reports that the reason he left The Witcher was to play Superman, even though Henry Cavill's been unhappy doing The Witcher because the writers don't appreciate the source material. But that's a whole other story, I guess. People don't want to acknowledge that. But I'm sure, playing Superman was some sort of factor in Henry Cavill leaving The Witcher. But after Dwayne Johnson, it was reported that Dwayne Johnson went out and, went over Walter Hamada's head, who at the time was still head of DC Films, to get Henry Cavill back and to do that cameo. So it's a little messy, just a tiny bit messy of what's going to happen. But we obviously need to see, what's truly going to happen with everything DC Films. Just when you thought it was going to go well, this kind of thing just happens. And Wonder Woman 3, not a lot of people liked the last one. Not a lot of people liked Wonder Woman 1984. I was on the fence about it. I'm still kind of on the fence about it, really. I haven't gone back and watched it, but from what I can remember, it was just okay. It wasn't great. It didn't live up to the first movie. I'm not going to go out of the way and say that it sucked, but it just wasn't as good as the first movie and didn't live up to the hype that we thought it would. But the third movie not happening is kind of out there and crazy, because I don't think it was a for sure thing either. I think a lot of people just assumed that it was going to happen, or that Patty Jenkins assumed it was going to happen because she was obviously writing a script. Gal Gadot had that tweet that came out, I think, like the morning of the news, or I think maybe the day before, where she was like, I can't wait to see what the future holds for Wonder Woman, or for the character. And then this news comes out and everyone was like, does she know something we didn't know, that she didn't even know that it was going to be released? Or maybe she was going off, the news that Patty Jenkins had dropped off for treatment. So it was interesting, to say the least. The timing of that was not good. But there was that. And then Jason Momoa maybe being done with Aquaman, being Lobo. Look, as just a fan perspective, I saw Jason Momoa more as a Lobo character, not Aquaman. But it would be interesting to see if this is truly a hard reboot and hard reset for the DC movies, and James Gunn coming in and taking over. Look, it's a new regime. It's a new, it's new people in charge. And obviously when new people come in charge, they plan to do something different with what they have. A lot of that involves, changing plans that people thought were set, and, taking over and putting new people in charge, not going the extreme route, like, a certain somebody on a certain platform, but just changing certain things. And James Gunn obviously has a plan, and Peter Safran has a plan, and they want to execute that plan. And if that plan means that they have to go back and redo everything and reset everything, I think we have to just trust in James Gunn. I was very positive on James Gunn coming in and taking over DC Films. It never in my mind that I think that he was going to do a hard reset, but if that's what it takes to save the DC film slate and to, have fans, be excited for DC films, like truly excited for DC films, then I'd say it's going to be a hell of a risk, but let him do it. I think he's earned that right. I mean, he's obviously the head of the studio, so he can do what he wants. And if we don't agree with it, then, we can tell him, because like I said, he's been very vocal about certain things on Twitter, talking about what he plans on doing and what he wants to do. And he's even said that he's going to, listen to the fans. So I don't know what's going to happen with DC Films. I hate that there are multiple reports, so it's kind of hard to know what's what. But in terms of what's going to happen and the future of everything, we now we kind of sort of know, maybe-ish. We'll see. So that's it. That's all I have. So let's move on to the movies that are coming out in theaters this weekend and streaming for all your viewing pleasures.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
All right, so let's start off with the movies that are coming out on streaming. We're going to start with the Prime Video movie called Something from Tiffany's. This is based off a book by Melissa Hill. A woman's life gets upended when an engagement ring that was for someone else leads her to the person she's meant to be with. I don't know why that came off confusing. All right. Zoe Deutsch and Shay Michelle are two of the big names in the cast that you could probably recognize. It's I saw the trailer like when it first came out a while ago, and it's fine. It's not targeted toward me, so it's okay. But it's on Prime Video if you want to go watch that. On Apple TV Plus, this is a movie that came out in limited release last week, and I mentioned that we'll talk about it again. This is Emancipation. This is a movie directed by Anton Fuqua. It stars Will Smith as the runaway slave that makes it to the Union Army and has a picture of his back taken that at the time was the first full-blown proof of how slaves were treated in the South. And, obviously started the conversation about whether or not slavery is a good thing or a bad thing, which really should have been, very apparent, but it was back in the day, I guess, way back in the day. Not that it made it okay, but that's what it was. So this is a movie that came out, again, limited release. It's coming out Apple TV Plus this week. So if you didn't get to watch it in theaters, you can watch it at home this week, and there you go. That's Emancipation. On Shudder, there is Christmas Bloody Christmas. This is about a robotic Santa Claus that goes haywire and goes on a killing spree because... yeah, that's what happens. That's what happens when robotic Santa goes haywire. Just automatically goes on a killing spree. So there you go. That's on Shudder. It's Bloody Christmas, rather. There you go. And then on Netflix, our last streaming movie, it is Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which has gotten nothing but good reviews, at least from what I've seen. I'm sure there's probably one bad review out there, but everything that I have seen from people that I follow that have happened to have it, or just insiders that I have seen tweets about, they people that have seen it have said nothing but good things about Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. So I'm very looking forward to it because I'm a huge fan of Del Toro. He's one of my favorite directors, and I've been looking forward to this because, yeah, who doesn't want a Guillermo del Toro movie that's on Pinocchio? I mean, come on. So there you go. That's on Netflix if you want to go check that out. In theaters, a limited release of The Mean One. This is the Mr. Grinch horror, The Grinch. I don't know why I keep confusing, but I'm confusing Mr. Grinch, or I did it again, Mr. Scrooge and The Grinch. I don't know why I'm doing that, but it's The Grinch. It's the horror version, the horror movie of The Grinch going on a killing spree. There you go. The Mean One. Also on limited release is Empire of Light. This is written and directed by Sam Mendes, a drama about the power of human connection during turbulent times, set in the English coastal town in the early 1980s. This stars Olivia Colman, Colin Firth, newcomer Ron Cook, and Toby Jones. This is an Oscar contender, Empire of Light. So if you're into the Oscar contender race or anything Oscar worthy, Empire of Light is one of those movies. It's been getting some really good reviews coming in out of the film festival circuit. Some decent reviews, but a lot of them, from what I've seen, have been mostly positive. A lot of them praising Olivia Colman's performance, saying it's one of her best, and that's just all she does. She's always on. She's always reliable. So if anything, watch it for Olivia Colman. Empire of Light. That is your limited release, or your last limited release of the week. Wide releases, we have 3. We have a re-release of Father Stu. This is the Mark Wahlberg movie that came out earlier this year, where he plays, this is based off a real person, Father Stuart Long, a boxer turned priest, who obviously is on a path of redemption. He ends up getting sick, very sick at one point, and continues his, his duties as a priest, and then went on to inspire many, many people. So this is getting a re-release. It's called Father Stu Reborn. Weirdly, it is not the rated R release. It is a PG-13 re-release. I don't know why they're doing that, but that's what they're doing, I guess. So it's a PG-13 re-release of Father Stu if you want to go watch that in theaters. Your other wide release is, spoiler alert, this came out on a limited release last week. It's coming out wide release this week. The story of Michael, I'm going to mispronounce their names and I apologize, or at least this person's last name, Osielio. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. And Kit Cohen's relationship that take a tragic turn when Cohen is diagnosed with terminal cancer. Jim Parsons, mostly known obviously for The Big Bang Theory, plays the person who is seeing their partner, played by Ben Ulrich in the movie. Ben Ulrich plays Corwin. Go through this process. And Sally Field's also in the movie. I think she plays the mother of Corwin. She doesn't play the mother of Jim Parsons' character. She plays the mother of the other guy. But yeah, that's spoiler alert. It's I don't really know anything about the true story, but it looks very dramatic. Obviously, it's one of those movies that kind of was been on the docket for a little bit and never heard anything about it, and then all of a sudden the trailer comes out and then it's everywhere. I've seen nonstop commercials. I saw nonstop commercials last week when it was getting its limited release, but now it's getting its wide release, and I kind of haven't really seen anything on TV. Maybe I'm just not watching the right channels or not coming on the right time, but there you go. Spoiler alert, it's coming out. And then your last wide release this week is The Whale. This is, of course, the new movie by Darren Aronofsky that stars Brendan Fraser, the Brendan Fraser Renaissance, if you will. He plays a reclusive English teacher living with severe obesity who attempts to reconnect with his estranged teenage daughter, played by Sadie Sink from Stranger Things fame, for one last chance at redemption. This is a movie that has been getting a lot of buzz, clearly a lot of it because of Brendan Fraser. I got that, long standing ovation at Cannes, and the reviews have been, fairly mixed, but I think a lot of them are praising Fraser for, coming back and true to form, and after everything he has been through in Hollywood, whether his body breaking down because of all the action scenes and everything that he went through with the Me Too movement that he was also a part of at that point, revealing that he had been abused by people in higher ups in Hollywood, but everything he's been through, now he's back, and everyone's rooting for Brendan Fraser, as they should. He genuinely seems like one of the nicest guys in the world and one of the nicest guys in Hollywood. So I definitely want him to succeed, especially in his renaissance coming back. And then we have The Whale that's coming out, and it's, again, I mentioned that it's getting decent reports. I think a lot of them, at least from what I've seen, have been fairly positive, and even the quote unquote negative ones that I've seen, a lot of them are saying that at the very least, Brendan Fraser's performance is very, very good. So I don't know what to think of The Whale. I haven't really seen any sort of promotion for it. I know the only reason I know it's coming out this week is because I look at the weekly releases, for the podcast. So it's coming out this week. It may or may not get a wide release, but it is considered a wide release. So usually wide releases that are considered, usually, I don't know if they still do this, but usually a wide release is considered, I think, over 1,000 theaters or over 900 plus theaters is considered a wide release. So it may just barely get that wide release count, but it's still coming out this week, and people should go watch. So if it's not in your theater or whatever, maybe wait a couple of weeks. Obviously, it's December. This is usually the time where there's a lot of limited releases coming out, and then obviously the following week they get a wide release. So especially early December, late December, it's a little awkward because it's a limited release, but then the movie doesn't come out until wide release in January, and then you get that weird thing where it's like, do you count it as a 2020 release or do you count it as a next year release? Because obviously when you're doing your end of the year list and stuff, so yeah, it's a little awkward on that part. But that's a whole other conversation that we can have some other time. But yeah, this is a weird week. This is one of those quiet weeks that we don't usually get. We get them a little bit in the end of December. There's usually 1 week in December where it's fairly quiet, quote unquote, where there's not a lot of big stuff coming out. But it usually comes at the end of December. This year kind of seems like it's this weekend, because next weekend we obviously have Avatar coming out, and we'll talk about that next week, because I might see it early, so I might have that Friday podcast just be about all Avatar. I haven't decided yet. And then obviously the end of the month, you got releases coming out on Tuesday and Wednesday, especially this week, especially this year, because Christmas falls on a weekend. So, you have a lot more movies coming out then as well. But we'll talk about all that next week, or in the following week as well. But yeah, this week's a very quiet week in terms of movies coming out in theaters and stuff like that. So if none of this sounds appealing to you, there's obviously a bunch of movies out in theaters that you can go watch. I watched The Fabelmans earlier this week that I thoroughly enjoyed. It wasn't overly great, but I enjoyed it. It's Spielberg. It's about his life, so I enjoyed it for what it was. A bunch of other stuff in theaters, obviously, as well, and none of them are coming to my mind now, because of course they're not. But Fabelmans is the only thing that comes to my mind right now, because that was the last thing I watched in theaters. But yeah, there you go. All right, so those are your releases for this week. I don't know why that was hard to say, but your releases for this week in theaters and streaming. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast this week. Like I mentioned, this was a very quick, dirty podcast. I will try to get this out as soon as possible, just because the way my schedule is working out, it's just I have literally almost zero time to really properly edit something and to record stuff. So this month's going to be a little awkward. And my end of the year, these last few podcasts obviously might be down and dirty movie news items. Just like 1 or 2 movie news items and then the movies that are coming out. So obviously I will try to find a way to give you a proper podcast, but hopefully these are sufficient enough for anybody listening out there. So thank you guys for listening. No matter where you're listening to, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, all those other places that are linked down below. There's a bunch of other links down there, social media, the trailers that came out this week, and yeah, social media down there as well. So thank you guys so much for listening. As always, be sure to be good people. Stay safe out there. Stay warm, especially if you're, one of those people that actually has a winter like we are here in the Chicagoland area. Although it's been pretty decent. Don't want to jinx that. But thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you guys all next week. As always, go watch some movies.
Whoop whoop! Yeah! Give it up! Movies!